Lions and Panthers, the roof expected to blow off of Ford Field on Sunday. And one of the guys in the building will be Chris Myers, broadcaster for Fox NFL games. He, along with Moose Johnson, Pam Oliver, have the call. One of our favorites, the great Chris Myers.
All right,
How you doing, Chris?
Well, thank you. It's good to be on with you guys, and it's good to be here when the vibe is healthy on the Lions. I called the game last year where they were rolling toward the playoffs at Carolina, and was shocked and stunned by what happened, and so I still can't get over that. I still don't know what happened, but I love the way they responded. They responded to beat the Packers the following week.
That was a bad Christmas Eve for us.
It essentially, Chris, kept the Lions out of the playoffs. What have you've been broadcasting Lions games for years, Chris? What have you seen recently from this team, be it this year or that last year, second half of last year, that Carolina game notwithstanding, that just this feels like a different situation we have here in Detroit? Finally.
Yeah, I mean they've changed the national image too of the kind of team they are, and it starts with the Dan Campbell effect. And we know it took a while, and he talked a big game, and now they're able to back it up. What I see is, especially when some teams are having problems with their offensive line, it just jumps out at me. Even with injuries, that's a real strength for this team. So they can run the ball effectively. They can protect Goff so he can play some of his best football. Defensively, I was worried about them last year, even early, and I know Dan made some adjustments, Aaron Glenn, and whether they were blitzing or too aggressive or didn't have the right. I like that they moved on. Their secondary, that they, was never an Okudah fan, no offense, injuries, whatever, didn't work out. Hope he does well with the next team. But I like that they've improved that part of their team. I think that they're just not a pushover. And that, I hate the word statement game, but because they don't need it. But I think the country saw in that opener against the Chiefs, and they aren't the same Chiefs, but these aren't the same Lions either. Just how for real they are. And you talk about the Eagles, and I'd love to see, just as a fan, a 49er Lion NFC Championship game. I mean, the kind of physical, gut it out, go for it, in your face kind of football. So that's who they are, and they back it up. And even when they have a misstep, I love the way they respond. And you touched on it last year, even though they missed the playoffs, to go out and beat Green Bay, and even this year, just the way that they've bounced back. So yeah, there's a lot of factors, but it's coming together at the right time.
Hey, Chris, no offense taken on Jeff Okudah. We agree with you on that as well.
Okay.
You actually were high on Dan Campbell as well. I remember last time we talked to you, you talked about Dan Campbell, you talked about this team and talked about what they could be. You talked about response just now. Talk about Jared Goff and the 3 interceptions that he's thrown this year. He's responded with a touchdown on the very next drive after all 3. Seems like a guy that's very different than when he first got to Detroit.
Yes, and a guy that I think he won't say it. He's very professional, the chip on the shoulder, and Sean McVay, he went to a Super Bowl with the Rams. But the way that was done, even Ram fans who were kind of not big Goff fans, they respect him for how he's handled things and how well he's done in Detroit. And I think they've brought the best out in him. Ben Johnson, Dan Campbell, even when there were doubters, and maybe even within that building with the Lions. I don't know. In a period, he's kind of a throw-in. He could take his salary. Obviously, with the running game and the kind of team they have, a number of quarterbacks would flourish. But I've covered Goff quite a bit. I did his very first game when he played, number 1 overall pick, and he weighed in. The Rams were horrible then. And then I covered him through the playoff run when they won at New Orleans and beat the Cowboys at home, went on to the Super Bowl before losing that game. And that was a defensive struggle. And I think he wants to get back to that. So I know he's not an elite. We label quarterbacks, but he's got what it takes. And especially, he wears that 16 because of Montana. He's got a little bit of that California cool. I'll shake it off, and just we talked about whether he throws a pick 6, and he's got a few of those. We've seen him. I did the game the previous year with Seattle, and he had that. But he handles that well, and I think now he knows he's got the team. He's not looking over his shoulder. He's got the team to back him up, even if he screws up.
Chris, first of all, we missed you on SportsCenter. I loved you growing up, watching you on SportsCenter. That was the guy. You're no good. Love all of that.
Wow. You're pulling out. It's up there. It's out there. It's a home run there. You're pulling out the classics.
I am. I got to pull out the classics. I wanted to ask you about these rookies. Have you looked at these Detroit rookies? The top 4 picks alone: Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta. and who am I missing?
Brian Branch.
Brian Branch.
Branch, yes.
Stud safety. I mean, if the Lions could stay away from these injuries, they should be 4-0 right now going into this game.
Yeah, and you saw, I guess it was Montgomery didn't play in the Atlanta game, right? He came back. Yeah, the Seattle game was an overtime flip, and we know what happened on that one. And I remember when they traded Hockenson, I was like, wow, what are you guys doing? This is a contending team. And now I see it. And it was kind of explained to me at the time by Dan when we had the game. It's like, well, but I get the salary, and then you adjust, and you get other picks, and then you get a guy like Laporta who can fill that role and other positions. So, yeah, the rookie class, what they've done with talent, blending in with veterans, and you hit on it. I mean, it's amazing with the amount of, and everybody has injuries, but when they hit you in certain spots, and I remember even last year as a rookie when Kirby Joseph had to play quite a bit. Guys have stepped up. So that's the other part of this. And then you got veterans or people that they've added, people like a Kaminsky who's kind of represents a Dan Campbell on the field. I will say this though, and you just triggered a thought. Daryl Johnston, who I worked with on a regular basis years ago before I went with Robert Smith and worked with Rondé Barber. Before Dan Campbell was hired by the Lions, I remember Daryl telling me just in a casual conversation while traveling when he was talking about the AAF or the USFL or so. He goes, boy, if I had a choice to hire a guy as a head coach who's not a head coach out there, Dan Campbell would be the guy I would hire. And soon after that, if you talk to him, you get a chance to talk to him, and I'll try to bring it up in the game because I don't know if he's ever been given credit for that. I don't know if he had a hand in it or not anywhere along the line, but that stuck with me. And when I saw Dan hired, and then I saw that first year, and we knew his personality, I was waiting it out. But obviously he's come through, and he's handled young players as well as veteran players, and that's part of what a good head coach does.
Yeah, he's a winner. We love him here in Detroit. But you better bring some extra boost in that headphones on Sunday, Chris, because Ford Field has never been as loud as it's been the first 2 weeks of the season here.
Yeah, I've been there, when it hasn't been loud, but I'll tell you, since Ford Field's open, selfishly, as an announcer, there's two big things that are important to us in the booth there. One, that we have a good sight line to the field, and you do here at Ford Field. And the other one is that you have your own bathroom in there because sometimes you gotta run real quick. Yeah. You're drinking to stay, coffee or something. The caffeine is rushing. You hit a break, you got to run real quick. But it's a really, and we root for the good games, good competition and good guys. And this game, has a lot of it, and the Lions have a lot of that. They're the I hate to compare the America's underdog like the Cubs were more recently in baseball. So if it's not your team they're beating or your division, they have the country behind them. They are kind of America's NFL darling from that standpoint, and we've seen that build. And the more they win and have success and handle it the way they're handling it, because they're a very respectful winner. I've noticed that about them, and maybe it's because of the downtrodden years, but that makes them a fun team and Detroit and Ford Field a fun place to be.
Hey, Chris, just interesting. What is a game week like for you? When do you get into town? When do you meet with the team? What's that week like for people who may not know?
Yeah, I'll try to streamline it. The typical thing is, and your crew, you do a game, and by Sunday night, on the way home, I at least know the next game I'm doing. I did the Bucs Saints last week, for example, right? So I knew we were doing the Panthers Lions this week. So on the way home, I'm checking the roster right away, some notes I might have had from before with those teams. And Monday, Tuesday, you watch a little football, whatever, and then by Wednesday, you start talking about who you want to meet with. You start looking at games if you haven't watched. We have access to coaches' film and notes from different stat rating groups. Try not to get caught up in numbers, but then our producer and our analyst will decide who we're going to talk to. So, for example, in this case, normally, and I'll fly first thing in the morning, get in and go to Lions practice where we'll all meet up. Daryl Johnston, Pam Aller, we'll watch a little practice. It's great that the teams give us that access. They trust us that if they're running certain plays, we won't video them or talk about those plays. Then we get, 3 or 4 guys, the head coach, coordinator, a couple of players to talk to, Jared Goff, Aaron Glenn, Dan Campbell, and then if Daryl, the analyst, wants to talk to a few other guys. And there's no cameras rolling, so it's kind of a free-flowing conversation. And you really gather a lot more information to add on to the notes that the beat writers and the websites and the digital groups that have carried all week. And then, we have a production dinner on Friday night where we kind of discuss some stuff. And then Saturday, we usually meet up with the visiting team when they get into town. In this case, Carolina's coming in a little later, so we're doing some Zooms with their coaches and quarterbacks. We have a production meeting on Saturday night to go over graphics. Early to sleep. It's a school night, as we call it, up early, out of the stadium, do the game, and then fly home, and then you're on to the next game. And the good thing is, if you've covered a team a few times during the course of the year, like last year, I got quite a few Lions games. Then it becomes a little bit easier. You're a little more familiar. But the first thing is numbers, names, pronunciations, who's hurt, where's their attitude, where's their season. I do read a lot of info from what fans say, just to hear the vibe of that, because in a sense, at least as a play-by-play guy, I'm representing what a fan of those teams cares about when you're calling the game. And that's kind of what it looks like in a nutshell.
Chris, you talking to you just made me remember one thing I do miss about playing in this league. It definitely was getting that notification that somebody wanted to talk to you on that Saturday at the hotel in the ballroom. As soon as you land, you go to the hotel, they say, hey, Chris wants to talk to you. Or if it's different network. Like, the guy I used to hate talking to was Steve Tasker because he was so detailed. Like, you talk to Steve, he's like, so, brother, when I notice when you run the end cut and on the end cut, you're supposed to be – I'm like, damn, Steve, I'm just trying to play in the game. No, but Chris, I'm dead serious.
Some of our analysts
go ahead,
are
Chris.
You're right on with that. As some guys take it, it's very much an honor. Like sometimes the media rep for the team will say, hey, this is his first time doing a production meeting, right? She's a little nervous about it. Like, no, it's okay. Like Bryce Young, the number 1 overall pick. He had things in college, but it's different in the NFL. So, and I had talked to him earlier in the year, so they're maybe not as forthcoming. And then there's some guys, Braylon, like athletes that don't have the time for it. They don't want to come.
I know those guys.
Or if they do, if the team says, hey, you got to go in, they're usually short with their answers. But you're right. Some analysts, like Darryl, will study video. I remember I worked with Mark Schlereth a few times. Those guys are so in the weeds on plays. It's like it's homework to me. My head's going to explode about the X receiver and the Z and the mug up. And I'm like, don't talk that way on TV. Nobody's going to know what the hell you're talking about.
Exactly.
And I got to tell them, we don't do the game for the quality control coach on offense, right? We do the game
for the fans.
The 10-year-old and the 80-year-old and whatever who's ever in between. And you can get technical, but please explain when you talk about that so that people at home, everybody can follow, not just the the football coach or ex-coach. But yeah, it's a fun thing, and you really get to meet and talk to guys. And some of it's not all football conversation. Some guys will talk about growing up or influences in their lives and that type of thing. So it's a really nice environment that I believe it was John Madden who really pushed that years ago in broadcasting, to have those kinds of meetings so that we weren't just on one side and the player and the coaches were on the other side.
Hey, Chris, before I let you go, I see your Emmy over your right shoulder.
I saw that, too.
And in the back, I
got that at a garage sale in Hollywood.
Oh, come on, man.
You're so full of it, Chris.
I know that's yours. I know that's yours. But the best thing I love the Don over your left shoulder in the back.
Marlon Brando.
Okay,
Marlon Brando. What's the football?
Tom Brady.
That's a Tom Brady football?
Oh, the football.
No. Well, that would I think that was signed by a bunch of the Fox Hall of Fame guys from Howie Long, Bradshaw, Strahan, some of those, and then some other guys. It was for my son. He got some players signed it for him, and a Brady jersey that they sent us, and there's a baseball jersey back there as well for the playoffs. I think.
You rooting for the Dodgers?
I grew up a Dodger fan, believe it or not, even before I came to before I came to Los Angeles. So I've always been. I grew up back in the Steve Garvey, that era.
Me too.
Of the Dodgers. So I still kind of root for them.
Yankees,
but again,
Dodgers,
you have to become. You're always a fan at heart, but you have to become a little bit impartial. But as I said, you can't help but root for good guys and not against guys that are jerks. But if they're jerks, you're not bothered if they lose a game.
Hey, Mookie Betts. You're talking about Mookie Betts. That's a good
guy.
We
love Mookie. Yeah, Freddie Freeman. They got a good hitting. Their pitching's not very good this year in terms of, they have Kershaw. They don't have an ace. It seems the trend to throw out a bunch of arms and try to win that way. But the Braves are really the team to beat, I think, in the National League. The AL seems wide open.
I like the Phils.
The Fighting Phils.
Yeah.
Chris, we're huge fans of yours. Thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it, man.
You're the man, Chris.
All the best on the flight over to Detroit, and we'll be watching.
All right, hey, and if the Lions don't win minimum 12 games, I'll be shocked. Okay, remember
that. Amen to that.
All right, we'll see you guys. Enjoy the game.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. You as well.
You as well.